Hi guys, I'm Janelle and welcome back to another Logic Pro tips and tricks. And today we're going to be talking about saving your projects, project alternatives, and track alternatives. When you start a project, I always like to save it from the beginning. So I'll go to File, Save As. I always like to save everything to an external hard drive. If it's possible, if you don't have any, then you'll save it to your computer hard drive. I always like to save my sessions to my external hard drive and even run them from my external hard drive so I don't put a lot of stress on my computer. When I'm saving sessions, I always like to save it as a folder, and I like to include any audio files, any sampler, Alchemy, Ultrabeat, Space Designer, any movie, or include any Apple sound library content. Because if you're taking your session to another studio to work and you created your own sampler sound or your own Ultrabeat, none of these things are going to load up if they've not checked. So I always like to include all these, and I always like to include it in a folder. And why is that? Because if I go to my folder, I have all these subfolders. So here's my project, and then I have my audio files all grouped in one folder. I have any bounces or any freeze files that I've done, any impulse responses or any sampler or any samples. So all these are going to be in subfolders, which is very helpful to have everything organized this way. If I'm working with a session or a project, I like to create within the same folder project alternatives. You can create project alternatives, and these are versions of a project, and each of them will have their name, will have different settings. Basically, you're saving different snapshots in different states of a project. So when I'm mixing, I like to do project alternatives. I'll name them by the day, and even if I'm working by the hour, because if I go in the wrong direction on my mix, I can work on that one that I actually liked before. The same if I'm doing arrangement, I'll save a new alternative if I add a new instrument or if I bounce everything into place. So if I bounce any instruments to audio after a while, if I'm working on the project and I'm like, oh, I don't like that part, I can go back and then rearrange and bounce again. I always like to bounce everything in place so I'm not putting all that stress on my computer. But then I'll save a new alternative so I can always go back to the session where I have all my instruments and I can make any changes. So as I said, they're all saved as part of the project and they'll share the same assets. So now let's talk about track alternatives. And track alternatives is having one or more alternatives of one instrument or audio track. So it's almost like a track stack where you can work with different ideas and then you can save it as a new alternative, or you can duplicate and do different processing to that alternative. You can have multiple without affecting the other alternatives. When we use track alternatives, you can create multiple arrangements within the same track. They'll all share the same channel strip. And this is useful because I don't want to duplicate my piano with all this processing that is going to take CPU power. So I'd rather have just one track with the same processing and create alternative regions inside. So how do we get to the track alternatives to show next to the name of the track? So we're going to control click on the track, go to track header components and track alternatives. And as you can see now, you have an arrow up and down right next to the name of the track. And we already have a piano part, but I'm going to try something else. So we're going to do a new piano part and then I'm going to play something different. We're going to press Shift R to capture record that. So now you can see the two different alternatives. You can duplicate any of the alternatives. In this case, if we click duplicate, we're going to duplicate B. You can rename by region. So you'll be naming the region, not the track. You can delete inactive, or you can show both alternatives. One thing that's interesting, if you do any track automation on the top part here, it will share that track automation with the other alternatives. So if you do any automation down here, and you can press A to bring the automation lane up, it will be a region-based automation and not a track-based automation. So let's automate the volume, right? And I change my alternative. They're going to share the same automation. But then if we do this automation down here and we want to automate the volume, let's just make random lines for now. If we change our alternative and then we go to B, then the automation won't be on this region or this alternative. The only thing that these alternatives will share is any track-based automation and anything that you have on your channel strip. And then let's say that you want to hear this alternative and you're showing all of them. You can just turn on this little button and then you'll hear this alternative. And then the same thing, then they'll go back to 8. And then you can rename them. You can use the rename button here, or you can just double click on the B. And as you can see, it'll rename the alternative, not the track name. And then this is a useful way to try different parts of the same instrument within a song when you're doing arrangement or when you're composing. And those are the quick tips that I have for you today. If you're always looking for tips and tricks in Logic Pro, please subscribe and click on the bell so you don't miss any content.